Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. My name is Dan and I'm here to bring you another FPL video for the Fantasy Premier League season 2022-2023. So in this video we're going to be looking at a fixture analysis for game weeks 1 to 5, those all important bracket really of game weeks that we look at when we initially draft our teams or should be drafting our teams towards. We're going to be looking at who has the most favourable fixtures versus the worst and discussing a couple of player options as we discuss the detail. So jumping into it here, as we can see, the top 5 teams, they're going to be split into groups of 5 across those 5 game weeks. We can see Arsenal, Liverpool and Manchester City there in the top 3 of the fixture ticker. So you've probably seen quite a lot already across multiple channels, Twitter as well, that there's definitely a lot to be said about a possible template that's forming with Manchester City players, including Cancelo, Haaland, or possibly Laporte and Haaland, maybe even Diaz in some drafts. Then you've got the Trent, Salah and Diaz combination for Liverpool. Also, I've seen drafts with Saka and Gabriel Jesus in, including even Tomiyasu in some of them. So you can see straight off the bat really why so many managers are looking at these teams, at least in that first 5 game weeks, because I mean the fixtures say everything that we need them to. Really, there's some really favourable fixtures in there for all the teams. Wolves and Everton are 4th and 5th respectively. So I think there has been a lot of discussion on Pedro Neto and what he could potentially offer us, considering he's only scored, I think it's 2 goals in 30 Premier League games or 30 Premier League appearances. Again, one to watch for the pre-season really before he's considered a 100% pick in our drafts. But a Leeds and a Fulham fixture in those first 2 game weeks potentially could be that small kind of risk really, but one that's not too big on the budget. It's only 5.5 million to put him into your team, yet he could return quite nicely in those first few weeks. Even in the Tottenham fixture, to be honest, then Newcastle and Bournemouth in 4 and 5, it's not looking too bad for him at that price point. So I think that's why you see him in so many drafts. Everton, I mean, to be honest, if it wasn't for the Chelsea fixture at the beginning, I think we would probably see Anthony Gordon or Damari Gray in a few more drafts, really. I think Dominic Calvert-Lewin, the game has just priced him out as an option, really. I think 8 million is just too much for him. It's just based on last season. It's very difficult to commit to what he can do. He absolutely thrived under Ancelotti, but with Lampard, it's a completely different story. I know again he was injured last season, but it's very difficult to put him in at that price point over, let's say, Gabriel Jesus at this point. So I think with Everton, it's a tricky one. Although I would say maybe Mikalenko at 4.5 could be potentially an option as a sort of wing back as opposed to Tomiyasu from Arsenal for that 4.5 mark. I don't think there's any reason why we wouldn't go for him. Same for Ait Nouri or a Wolves defender, essentially at a 4.5 mark. Again, there's probably plenty of argument, really, at least in the first few game weeks, to have them as a 5th or 4th defending option. So moving into the next 5 teams, we have another of the top 6 there in Chelsea. I think I am leaning towards a potential shift in my initial draft, really, to try and find a way of bringing 2 8 million midfielders in. I don't think Diaz is someone I want to lose, but maybe Mason Mount, based on either these fixtures or just, again, watching pre-season, especially now Sterling has signed for Chelsea at time of recording. It's looking like it could be a possibility to bring him in. So he's definitely on the watch list. I would say from a defensive perspective, really game week 2 is the only possible fixture I would say there that's going to cause Chelsea immediate problems. But even then, because it's a London derby, second game week in, both teams may start either slowly or they're just, feeling each other out a little bit before anyone really commits, which means it can end up in either a score draw or, let's say, a 0-0 that early on in the season. So it's kind of quite a good fixture from a defensive perspective, which is still why I'm leaning towards Chilwell or James in my draft. And then following on from that, of course, Bournemouth, Leicester and Southampton are also very favourable fixtures. Underneath them is Brentford, so 7th on the list overall. And you can see why, really, from a 4.5 goalkeeping perspective, why David Reyes should really be considered in terms of a contender, really. Only a couple down, we do have Brighton, though, which means that definitely Sanchez, which I mentioned in my previous video as an alternative, is certainly one to watch. Aston Villa there with some great fixtures for the first four. I think I discussed this in my first drafts video, where Everton, Crystal Palace and West Ham, although I've got them in the kind of second to easiest fixtures, by no means that means it's going to be a walkover for Aston Villa. It's just ultimately they could potentially play out to be tricky games. You could argue that maybe at least two of those fixtures could be grey rather than dark blue in this scenario. I think that being said, even though they could be tricky fixtures, I mentioned Trippier in my draft at the moment at that 5 million mark. A Cash or a Digne, even potentially a Coutinho could be an option. So we'll just have to, again, watch what happens in pre-season and see if there's anyone really we want to target from there. But I think ultimately, when we get past Aston Villa into the Brighton and then the Leeds territory, we're starting to tread into that area where the fixtures are becoming into the kind of the more difficult side. And you'll see in the third slide, really, these teams, I wouldn't necessarily say you have to completely avoid players from these teams, but it will become maybe a little bit more difficult to keep up with the pack. Let's say if a lot of people go for the City, the Liverpool and the Arsenal players early on, and say, for example, you do choose 2 or 3 Spurs assets, although Chelsea's marked here as a very difficult fixture. Like I say, I could argue it's maybe one notch down, but then a Wolves that again could prove tricky for them, and a West Ham in game week 5. So other than Forest and Southampton, those first 5 fixtures aren't really playing into Spurs' hands too much. I potentially would like to have an asset, just because I think Conte will continue the work he's doing with the team and progressing it forward. But I think we shouldn't necessarily be looking at their premiums on this basis. So Kane and Son, Kane is definitely someone I'll look at in the future, 100% one to watch. And same for Son, really, to be honest. At that price point, Salah could easily move down to him if he starts, blanking for a few game weeks or so. But early on, I think it may be a bit of a risk to go for either of them straight away. West Ham and Manchester United in that kind of 11th and 12th position respectively. I think, again, there's plenty of players and opportunities for us to jump on them at some point. So plenty of players for the watch list. Jadon Sancho, Marcus Rashford. Could put Souček in there. If Lingard decides to go back to West Ham, potentially he could be an option as well. Antonio, we all know how he started last season. He absolutely smashed it. Bowen is a little bit kind of he's in that 8.5 bracket, which is slightly awkward to get to. If you've got an 8 million midfielder, you need to find the extra 0.5 for him. But he's, again, another one to watch. So by all means, these fixtures don't necessarily mean we should avoid the players that belong to these teams. But across the 5-week span, it potentially means that we don't look at them for that initial draft. It's just people that we may substitute in come, say, game week 3 or 4. So as we go further down then underneath Tottenham Hotspur, we have Fulham and Leicester. I think really in terms of Fulham, if Andreas Pereira does complete his move from Manchester United to Fulham, I think as a 4.5 million midfielder, he is definitely an option. I think at the moment, or I was looking at originally in my first draft, as Kieran Trippier being kind of substituted in game week 3 and 5, and we'll come to that when we see Newcastle's fixtures in the next section. To see why that is. But potentially Pereira being in that 4.5 million enabler position gives me the opportunity to play 5 in midfield with a playing 4.5 midfielder that potentially can score, a worldie of a goal. He definitely can put in a shift. And I think, he's not necessarily a proven Premier League player because he hasn't hit the ground running with Manchester United. He never really did. He's got a potential maybe to show what talent he does have. And in game weeks 3 and 5, Fulham play Brentford and Brighton respectively. So I think those 2 weeks could easily be, rather than trying to transfer and use a transfer up on a defensive position, I could just substitute in my budget midfielder, which is definitely an option. Leicester, I think we're then getting now into the territory of the really tricky fixtures to navigate. I have seen Jamie Vardy mentioned across Twitter and in a couple of drafts as well. He does tend to start the season really, really well. I think, again, he is one to maybe consider, but at the beginning, with the Brentford, Arsenal, Southampton, it's not too bad of a fixture. If you were planning to wildcard in, say, game week 4 or as early as that, maybe he puts you slightly ahead of the pack. Maybe he gets you quite a big sort of few green arrows in those first initial fixtures. But I think other than that, there isn't many people I'd consider. A lot of their defenders though are 4.5 million, so it's one to think about with Castagna, Justin, and Fofana and so on. They could definitely offer us an enabling defensive position for sure. So moving into the last 5 teams now. Again, as mentioned, Newcastle sitting here, unfortunately, with game weeks 3 and 5 because of that Man City and Liverpool fixture. So really, because at the moment I have Bruno Guimaraes and Trippier in my team, it is making me slightly reconsider having 2 Newcastle players for that reason. I don't know who will make way just yet. I need to maybe play around with it and check some more statistics alongside the pre-season data. But Newcastle being that far down is kind of making me second guess myself really, and maybe think about a potential. At least we know that the plan with Pereira, it would potentially get me over the line for game weeks 3 and 5. Without having to worry about transfers, but having 2 assets from there. Do I really think Bruno G is going to, score against City or Liverpool? Potentially he could do. He may produce something, but it's still a red fixture. It's risky. We'll just have to see where my thoughts take me, I suppose. But once I'd sort of analysed this before making the video, it's definitely made me reconsider. Forest there with the kind, again, they're the top of this page, but essentially they are 16th in terms of the fixture ticker all the way down. I do think Dean Henderson potentially could be an option at 4.5 as a goalkeeper. Those fixtures aren't really too bad in the first 4 game weeks. You could easily see potential clean sheets or at least a lot of save points in there. We know that he can do it, as he did for Sheffield United when he went there before. He's definitely got the potential to keep a team essentially in the Premier League. So at 4.5, he could be an option. I don't really know, again, too many of their players really to consider. I think Spence has been mentioned a couple of times. If he doesn't make a move, then he's a potential option. But other than that, I think, again, we're so far down now in terms of the ticker. These players from these teams maybe are too far beyond consideration. And to be honest, I think a lot of these, Southampton, Palace, Bournemouth, they're all included as well. I haven't seen drafts with the likes of Ward-Prowse or the likes of Zaha in there. And I think this is the reason. All you have to do is have a look at Southampton have got Tottenham, Leeds, Leicester United, Chelsea. Leeds, pretty good fixture, but then Spurs, Leicester United and Chelsea, the other 4 game weeks, it's, no doubt they will have a fixture swing at some point, but that's why maybe we shouldn't consider those players in the first 5 game weeks. Same for Crystal Palace. They've got Arsenal, Liverpool, Man City. So 3 of the top 6 teams are being played there by this team. And it's the same for Southampton. 2 of the top 4, 3 of the top 6. It's just, I think, a bit too risky to go with either a defensive option, even an attacker, really, for those 2 teams. And Bournemouth, really, we don't know what we're going to get from this team. Playing City, Arsenal and Liverpool on the bounce from 2 to 4 just makes it very difficult to justify putting one of their players in. And they do sit bottom of the fixture ticker. So that's pretty much the analysis, really. Like I say, the draft that I have in play at the moment, because I've got 2 Newcastle players, really after having a look at this and really breaking down the fixtures from game weeks 1 to 5, just because that's how I've previously planned in seasons, really, though that 5 game week mark is that kind of magic number, really, for me. I think because of game weeks 3 and 5, from that Newcastle perspective, it's a little bit risky to go with them. I do think we could potentially consider alternative options to Neto, although he is 4th on the fixture ticker. Again, game week 3 maybe being the trickiest. We could navigate to somewhere else or potentially rethink that. But I think really in terms of everyone else that I've built in the squad so far, this really has reinforced the reasons for those picks. But there's definitely, again, more tinkering, more understanding of pre-season data versus some analysis on what last season gave us from certain players before I sort of lock in any more picks, I think. So yeah, hopefully you found the video useful, guys. It's another pre-season video. It's another lot of data really that I hope helps you and you know, gives you some more insightful information to help us make those all important selections for our team. Again, thank you for all the support so far. Keep those comments coming in. Keep those likes coming up on the video as well. Really helps me out. And yeah, of course, again, I'll mention there is more content being planned for pre-season, and I'm very, very much looking forward to the season starting soon. So take care, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.